question. My
Sure.
name is Rebecca. I was just in your bee class. I had to turn my video off because it kept freezing. I apologize.
Yeah.
On BeeCommerce's site, they had some free downloads, and I had ordered some stuff from them. And one of them recommended using Fumidil. I think I might be pronouncing that right.
You are.
In the very beginning, when you're feeding your bees, when you put them from their package, do you recommend using that, sir?
No.
Okay. Okay, good answer.
Yep.
Thank you.
Let us know why.
You want to know why?
Yeah.
Well, because it doesn't have, it hasn't, in our environment where we keep bees, it hasn't shown that its efficacy.
Okay. And the other one that they said, but I thought you mentioned this in class, that's why I wasn't going to ask, was terramycin, but I thought
Yeah.
you already mentioned that and said not to.
Well, you can't use that unless you get a,
Yeah, a prescription or something, correct?
right. You have to get a registered, legitimate veterinarian to give you.
Yeah. That's the one I thought. All right, thank you.
Yeah. All right, cool. So listen, welcome to Bee Talks. So glad to see you all here. This is something that we are going to keep doing online until we can do it in person again, or maybe we won't. I don't know. We get such wonderful participation for folks that can't normally make it to Middletown. We get crowds that are almost twice the size. So we have to think about that hard going forward. That'll be something that we do as a new board when we convene again in March as a new board. We'll take that issue on and we'll get some feedback from you guys also to figure out how we want to go forward with Bee Talks. But anyway, that's in the future. I did want to mention something that we'll talk about. I'll send out a blog and I'll also send out reminders. We do have a significant event in that you'll be able to get some free equipment from it. And you'll also be able to get some instructions on how to treat for mites and how to test for mites and how to use robber screens, lots of things you're going to want to know how to do. And especially if you're new at beekeeping, but even if you aren't new at beekeeping, it's a good idea to have this apparatus around and learn how to use it because it gives you a way to navigate through your mite population in your colony. And so that's going to be on, so mark your calendars. If you're a CBA member, if you're not, of course, I encourage you to join. That would be a nice thing for you to do. If you're not, then, or if you are, you'll be getting a message. But that's Saturday, May 15th. So keep that in your calendar. That's at the Lockwood Farm. And that is in Hamden, actually. And I'll post directions to it in the blog post or on the event page or something like that. So you'll know you'll know how to get to Lockwood Farm. And also when you go there, you'll be able to get drone trapping frames for both large and medium boxes. You'll be able to get a powder sugar kit, an alcohol wash jar, plastic robber screens, and a device called a bee gym, which I'm very skeptical of, but we're going to be giving them out anyway because they do you folks know what a bee gym is? Do any of you know what that is? Yeah, it's not really a place where bees work out. You know, it's kind of it's a it's a little device that you put inside your colony, and the bees walk all over it, and it knocks off varroa. It's like an auto grooming device. And there's some convincing videos out there. And of course, the people that make it think it's wonderful, but I don't know anybody who's using them successfully, but you will have them. You'll be able to get one and you'll be able to try it out and you'll have lots of literature. And all of this is courtesy of a grant that our beekeeper, our bee inspector, Mark Creighton, did on your behalf. And he secured this grant and he purchased all of this equipment, including the literature. So all you have to do is show up at Lockwood Farm between 8 and noon on May 15th, and you will be given this equipment free. And also you can talk to Mark, you can talk to me also. Hopefully other folks in our organization will be there for you to also talk to, other beekeepers. So it'll be a good time. You get some free equipment and you'll learn some things about keeping bees. All right, so any other announcements? What do we got? Jose, anything else? Our annual meeting, but you've probably seen that our members meeting is on the 2nd of March at 7 p.m. That's a Zoom meeting. You already invited to that. And I think some folks have already signed up for it. And you'll get to, if you come to that meeting, you'll get to be able to vote for the new slate of officers. And there are some people on the new slate that you might be familiar with. So that's, that might, hopefully that'll convince you to come and support those people in the event that you consider them to be worthy of presidency and treasurer and so on and so forth. Not a meeting that we get a lot of participation in, but you know, it's part of your, I don't know, what would you call it?
Well, it's part of the right that members have.
Yeah.
We're a nonprofit organization, and we really are run by a board of directors and officers, all of whom volunteer their time to help as many people as we can become better beekeepers. And like any organization, it's a corporation, and we have things that we do, and the board of directors and officers meet every month to talk about the various issues and how to improve how we help new beekeepers and existing and experienced beekeepers. For example, something like this, the Bee Talks that we hold on second Thursday of every month. There's also the mentorship program, and there are so many things that are behind the scenes that members really don't get to see. And that's because, frankly, talented people like Bill just do yeoman's work all the time to get things done, including, and I don't want to embarrass him, but Bill has tremendous contacts throughout the beekeeping world, people who are top-notch in their field, and there are just not only lots of housekeeping duties that we do, but Bill, who's been taking care of what we call our programs as a program chair, taking care of putting on workshops and all kinds of other things. So it's we exist to help all of you, and nobody gets paid a dime for it. And we try to do the best we can, and listening to the members to see what they have as far as needs and what we can do to help out. So,
okay, cool. All right, so let's get on with Bee Talks. And so we had a couple of questions already. One about feeding pollen for those of you who joined a little bit later on. Those of you that want to feed pollen or want to try feeding pollen, you first have to figure out, by the way, what kind of pollen you want to feed. And that's pretty tricky. So I suggest that if you're going to feed pollen early in the spring, you do a little bit of research on what pollen provides your bees with a real advantage. So for instance, lots of pollen, patties and synthetic pollens are not all pollens are the same. Some folks have some manufacturers just put together some protein supplements and then put them in a little bit of carbohydrate, smash them into a pollen patty and put them on the market. Others have done extensive testing, and I'm waiting for the results of what's been a long test that was conducted over 1,000 colonies. So I really can't make a recommendation at this point, but I plan on being able to make a recommendation soon on what pollen patty is proving to be top in this race. There's a few of them that I think if you're going to feed would be worth the money, meaning that the bees will actually eat it and get some protein into their body as a result. My personal feeling is that you rarely need to feed pollen in Connecticut, but you know, that's just my opinion. So let's have some, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in the county.
Bill, there was, just before you get into that, there was one earlier question about, what you think of Russian bees. Are these pure Russian queens worth it?
Hold on, let me put my mic on. I don't even have my mic on. Hold on. Does that sound
What's that?
any different at all? No, it doesn't sound any different.
Oh, sounds the same to me.
Really, I paid that much money for that mic and it doesn't sound any different. Look, that's what I bought and it sounds no different than my computer mic. I can't believe it. I'd like to throw it out the window.
Well,
It made you a little bit blurrier, if that's any consolation.
It made it, oh, geez.
it did sound a little clearer when you had it closer to your mouth, honestly.
Yeah, okay, maybe I'll wear it around my neck like like some kind of
It's practically
made for
like
singing.
a liquid supplement for your bees.
yeah, okay.
It
See,
reduced
You
your mic
just
levels.
Russian queens. All right, Russian queens. So there's my sense of with Russian queens are if you buy them from somebody who is associated with the Russian Queen Breeding Cooperative and you check them out really well, you can get a queen that that they've done a fair job of being able to hold the genetics on. Now, what can you expect when you get a Russian queen in your yard? It might act differently than some of the bee stock that you have in your yard. So if you have two colonies together, you might be able to compare them. The Russians may work a little, may do things a little bit differently than what we normally have for bee stock in our country, which is a combination of Italian and Carniolan genetically. So yeah, worth it. It's just a matter of choice. I've had Russian bees in my yard a few times. They were fine. They didn't build a lot of, they're conservative bees. In other words, they stop brooding earlier in the season and they winter over in smaller masses. And I think the reason for that is that they just, they don't, they come from real cold climates, and in cold climates, bees cluster earlier, stay clustered longer, and then build differently in the spring. So you might find some different characteristics. A good thing for you to do to figure out if you actually like Russian bees or not is to buy a queen from a legitimate source and then take notes on how it progresses through the season. That's the only way you can figure this thing out for yourself. They're usually in high demand. That doesn't mean much. And but I think the only reason that they're in high demand because they're in short supply. So that's about it for Russians. Anybody else have any experience with Russian bees that they want to share? Russian queens, they're dark usually, they're black bees, which means nothing, but go ahead.
I had a couple, I probably had 5 colonies 2 or 3 years ago, Russians, and I don't know if it's because they were built up down south, but they were probably the orneriest bees I've ever
Dealt with.
Yeah.
Yeah, our experience is that our neighbors have bees. He does, a guy, and he bought Russians this past spring, and I spent the entire season fighting robbing from those bees. They would come over all the time. I had my hive, I only had 2 hives. Our first year shut down to just the tiniest opening, and boy, it was a battle. I could never put food outside the hives ever.
All right, so there's some folks that have dealt with. I had the same experience as Paul with the Russian bees that I bought or had in my yard. They were pretty. We'll call them defensive. They didn't make a lot of money here. Go ahead. Who else is talking?
My understanding is that the pure Russians are very different than the genetics of the various other bees. At least that's the claim. There's a guy in Massachusetts that's doing Russian bees, and he's, you know, promoting this, you know, the pure Russian strain as, you know, calm, unique, good buildup, you know, overwinters well.
I mean, you know, and so I don't see, that's where we're at distinct disadvantage as beekeepers trying to purchase a product like a queen. We have no facilities to be able to figure out if what that, as Paul's pointing out, that queen breeder who's saying that he has the real Russian bee, right? And it's gentle and it winters well. How would we know? You know, could we figure that out somewhere? Do they come with like a little certificate? You know, or can we do the genetics on them? You know, the answer is no, we don't really know. So we would have to take those, as Paul's suggesting there, and buy one of them and figure out if what he's saying is true. But even if we only bought one, it wouldn't make any difference, because all queens are on this continuum where they will display characteristics, you know, in degrees, and not all of them fall right into the middle with where you would list a, you know, where you would have a list of what characteristics to expect out of a certain queen. Not all the queens that are bred, even in the most delicate way or a careful way, will display all those characteristics. It's like saying this: how many Italian people do you know? You know, like, do they all act the same? You know, they don't. You know, like a whole race of people, like all of the Italians in the world act like Italians, and all of the Germans act like Germans. So there's individuals, queens, just like there's individual people in every race. So we wouldn't really know. We're at a distinct disadvantage when we're being sold queens, and the claim for them is that they have an ancestral heritage, and that ancestral heritage implies that they have a set of characteristics. That's where we are in trouble in our industry. Now, I can tell you with some certainty, based on the genetics, that whenever you buy anything that's called an Italian or a Carniolan in our country, unless you have a certificate that they've been inseminated with sperm from another country or something like that, or you buy a breeder queen right from that country or whatever, you're not going to get an Italian or a Carniolan. They are a mixture of about 40% Italian genetically, 40% Carniolan genetically, maybe 10% Caucasian, which is another kind of a bee. A little bit of Apis mellifera will be in there, mellifera, which is the black bee. So from a genome standpoint, the bees in our country are just plain old bee stock. Now, I happen to be writing an article for American Bee Journal on this subject, so I've done a lot of research on it lately. I started, I want to try to be able to write it without having death threats from the queen breeders in the United States. But this is a subject that I think is important for us to all know as beekeepers, and for us not to be sort of categorizing our bees or pigeonholing our bees into certain characteristics because somebody says they've given you an Italian queen. Oh, so you've given me Italian queen now, and you know, oh, they breed up and they don't stop breeding. They'll breed right through into the winter. You know, they die because they don't know when to stop breeding. You know, they're gentle. That's, in my experience, that's never true. I mean, they might, every queen bee in every colony, whether or not somebody told me it was a Carniolan or Italian, displays some of those characteristics. But never all of them. I don't think I've ever had a colony that had every single one of those characteristics that they list for, say, Italian bees and Carniolan bees. Now, the way that all came about was our first bee that came to the United States was a German bee. They called it the German black bee, and called it the European black bee. That was a little nasty bee. And that comprised our beginning bee experience in the United States. And that bee proliferated in swarms and into tree cavities all over the United States. And it was a very, very, very difficult bee to keep. And so there was a time when, and it happened, decades later, actually it happened hundreds of years later, when we gained the ability to be able to import bees, an Italian bee not from Ligustica or not from Liguria, where the Italian bee is named after. Apis mellifera ligustica is from the Liguria region of Italy. The initial Italian bee that came to the United States didn't even come from that area, but they named it that anyway. And to get here, it was crossed with the German black bee. And we called that, for about 50 years, we called that the three-banded Italian. And the reason that we called it three-banded Italian is because there was three bands on it that were darker. It inherited those bands from the German black bee. So the original Italian bee that came to the United States was already a cross between Italians and Russians. And black bees. So, or the German black bee. So even at the beginning, to start, there was a cross, and then it went on from there. So
Bill, picking up a comment from the chat, do your statements also cover the Saskatraz queens?
Oh, absolutely. But those bees, that's an interesting breed because they're not claiming they have an ancestral heritage. Like, they're just saying that they were bred in cold climates and that they're trying to breed them for characteristics. The characteristics they're trying to breed that bee for are industrial characteristics. They want that bee to brood up fast, make a lot of honey, be workable, and then they're saying they want it to be winter hardy also. So keep in mind that with the millions of packages and millions of queens that are sold in the United States every year, they're not thinking of backyard beekeepers when putting these queen lines together.
So,
Okay, I got it.
I'm entering my fourth year in beekeeping, and I had kind of spread out. Like, I first got my first beehive was, 2 packages of Italians, and then I got some Carniolans and some Saskatraz queens to use with splits, and a Buckfast nuke I added into the mix. And so, like, now I have like 20 hives, and for this year I was thinking I should get some queens from last year. I also grafted queens. Besides my splits, I did some grafting. And so I thought this year that I should buy some local Connecticut queens to like mix into like my local gene pool. I have other beekeepers around me. But I guess I'm wondering, is that necessary? Or I mean, I'm thinking even if it's a Connecticut mutt queen, that the genetics are maybe different than what I've got in my neighborhood, and is it wise to pull them in and mix them in with what I've already done?
Well, so you said you grafted from some of your colonies?
Yeah, last year I grafted the first time.
Yeah. And you made it out some new queen? You made it out some new queen? Okay, and you made it out queens from those grafts?
Yeah, I ended up with 4 out of that, little endeavor out of, like 15 that I had tried.
Okay, and you got queens from them?
And I put them all in hives.
Now, what do you consider their nationality?
I call them Connecticut mutts.
Because that's what they are. But you might have even started with mutts. I haven't had good reports from Saskatraz queens in our area, and almost all the reports I get about Saskatraz queens in Connecticut is that they don't make any honey at all. But some people, I guess, have a better luck with them. But what I'm suggesting to you, Alan, is that no matter what ancestral heritage you think you have in your yard, as soon as they mate out anywhere, they are no longer, even if it was so remote, it's so remote that they would be even close to being Italian or Carniolans, say for instance. they're no longer Italian or Carniolans, even if they were to begin with. So, so that's sort of what you should try to do in your efforts to breed queens for yourself in your yard. And you're on your way, Alan. And I really want to say, I want to support your efforts. That's exactly what we want to do. You just pick the best performers out of your mix, and those are the ones you breed from. That's it. So that's what you do. So it doesn't, forget about what you think they are, and don't spend any extra money on them either. Just buy regular queens, and then just breed from the ones that have the characteristics that you like, that you want in your yard. Whatever that is. It might be that you just like the way they run around the comb, but if you want to make honey with them, or if you want to, you want them to winter over.
I grafted, I chose off from my best honey producing colony of the year prior.
Okay. That's what you're going to get. Then you're going to get good honey producers. If some of those sister queens will be good honey producers.
Yeah,
that's how it'll work.
And that's what I was wondering is like, okay, so I did that in my area, but is there value in taking somebody that maybe has more experience than me and in another area of Connecticut, and is there value in that? Like, or is it, that bell curve that you've talked about, no matter who is breeding the queens, or the queens are breeding with, you're going to end up with either a good one or a bad one. Or,
Yeah, you're not going to be able to win this battle, Alan. I'm sorry to say. No, you should really stay vigilant on making certain that you're always breeding from the colonies in your yard that you appreciate their characteristics, whatever that is. If you're trying to make honey, that's what you do then. And then you're going to have to you put up with whatever temperament you get. Like I had a colony that I named the Franken Hive. That colony would chase you around the block a few times.
I had one like that this year, yeah.
But that thing made a ton of honey, made 230 pounds one year. So I put it someplace where it wouldn't bother anybody, and it made a lot of honey year after year. So and it lasted about 4 years. That queen lasted about 4 years, and that colony always made a ton of honey. Now, I didn't breed from it because it was too nasty, but that's what you do. You breed from that. And no, go into another place, unless you go to someplace near one of our queen breeders. Like if you went through near Byron Martin, if you got him to agree to let you take your queens up to your virgin queens up to his area and breed them out into one of his mating yards, then you might have a chance at that point to capture his genetics, because he does a lot of Varroa sensitive hygienic work. He's looking for Varroa control. He's breeding in that area. So you might get that. Most breeders want gentle bees that make a lot of, or most beekeepers want gentle bees that make a lot of honey and that are resistant to Varroa. Find me that bee, please, because that bee just flat out doesn't exist yet. We're in the middle of all of those characteristics on some bees. So I just want to leave you all with this notion about characteristics and how you should view your bees. You should view them the way you should take more stake in how they actually, how you observe their behavior than what somebody told you they may look like or act like. You can go online right now, and somebody might want to do that and get the characteristics of an Italian bee and the characteristics of a Carniolan bee. Put them side by side. You can wait for my article to come out. I'm gonna write it all so you can see it. But and then you'll find that. And then so we've sort of handed this bee lore down for a long time, and it's been ingrained in the psyche of queen breeders, especially, that they can sell you these bees, and they can just call them Italians or call them Carniolans, and you'll expect them to operate that way. But I'll suggest to you that they won't. They may have some of the characteristics, they won't have them all. And I don't want you to be deceived by that. I'm convinced. I know. Let's move on. What do we got in the chat?
So we have an interesting question. Do you think that the available forage is lacking in Connecticut, or is hive density not a problem at all?
High density meaning, I guess high density meaning a lot of colonies in one yard.
Probably is what they mean.
Yeah, I don't think that Connecticut can support more than 10 or 15 colonies in one yard, in one area. So that's about the max in my opinion. I happen to be in a really good honey producing area, and I can make 2 crops of honey here, one in the, what I call my spring, early summer honey. And then I can also make a fall honey, which I don't do, but I could, because I'm near about 40 acres of goldenrod. And if it's a year when goldenrod produces, I can make a fall crop also. But we have enough floral sources in almost every area of Connecticut, with the exception of the shoreline, which usually experiences a more prolonged dearth than some of us do in the midsection in the Connecticut Valley region, where we can make an adequate amount of honey in any one colony, between 60 to 70 pounds, very consistently make that kind of honey. And it's fairly easy to do also. So no, I don't think, was that the original, did I get to that original question, Jose? Is that,
Yeah,
is that about it? Yeah.
Well, what can the shoreline do to help during the dearth? What can we plant? What can we supply?
No, you can't plant or do anything like that. If you run into unless you have an extraordinary amount of acreage to plant, then you could plant for bee forage. But if you don't have millions and millions of blooms to provide your bees, then you have to, if you're going to be keeping bees in areas where there is a common dearth, then you have to make sure that you always are vigilant about what your bees are experiencing, and make sure that you provide them with some supplemental food during that time. And yeah, so that's what you have to do. You have to feed, basically. When in other areas you might not have to feed. I haven't fed my colonies. I don't think I've fed my colonies in the last 3 years, not even one little jar of syrup. Because I don't buy packaged bees or.
So a related question, Bill, is if you are recommending not to take fall honey so as not to have to feed them sugar syrup.
Yeah, so if you take my experience over a decade of taking a fall crop, is that less than a decade, but that I had a lower survival rate over the winter, even when I fed like crazy in the fall. Because after you take your fall, if you take a fall crop from your colony, then you're they were dependent on that to overwinter on. So if you take that, they're without their stores for the winter, and you have to race against time then to make sure that they have enough resources in their colony to overwinter. And I just found that I get a higher death rate in the winter when I took a fall crop. It lowered it noticeably from me, maybe 30% to maybe 20 or something like that. So that's why I don't take a fall crop. So if you want to follow that guide, then you would take your honey at the end of July, and then you would leave whatever that happens to them from in July, August, and September, and October, you let happen. And then they build up their stores for the winter naturally. If you don't want to if you want to take a fall crop, it's a completely different honey. It's great. It's dark. It's rich. But as I said, it didn't work out for me to take them.
So how do we decide? I kind of had this conversation in last month. How do we decide? This was our first year. We're wintering over. We did not take anything last year. We left 2 deeps. They were probably, the bottom was full and the top was maybe 3/4 full. And I left fondant. So how do I decide in the spring if next year I want a July crop or a fall crop? How is that determined?
No, it's not one or the other. It's you can take both a fall and a summer crop. But what I'm suggesting is if you do, then you have to feed like crazy And if you're in an area where there's a dearth in the fall, you're not going to get a fall crop. Like if you're on the shoreline and you get a big dearth, you just won't get that fall crop. So that'll be, you don't have to worry about that because it won't happen. You know, so you don't determine that. You have to observe what your bees are doing. If they're packing away a lot of honey in the beginning of the year, and by July your supers are full, you take that crop, if that's what you want to do. If you want to harvest honey from that colony, you take that crop then. And when you put your supers back on to dry them out, they call them stickies, by the way, when you extract the honey from them. The frames still have a little bit of honey in them. We refer to those as stickies. You can put those back on the colony. The bees will clean it out. And then if you're going to try to make a fall crop, you would keep them on there and see if the bees fill them again.
So Bill, I would like to remind folks that if they have questions, to please feel free to go ahead and unmute yourselves and ask the question. If you don't want to do that, you can write them in the chat and I'll just parrot your question. The issue with that sometimes is that Bill will have a follow-up question with you, and so I won't know what you really mean with your question. So feel free to ask your question. So having said that, there are a couple of questions about overwintering bees.
Yeah.
Someone asking if it's worthwhile to invest in overwintering bees, and what is the best way. Another question related to that is, what's the best way to develop an apiary of locally adapted queens, and is that our best chance for overwintering them?
All right, so I don't think I understand the first question. This first question is it worth to try and overwinter bees?
The first question is, let me get back to it again.
That was me.
Is there a value to buy overwintered bees?
Oh, is there a value to buy overwintered bees?
Yeah.
Well, only if you get an overwintered queen with them. So an overwintered queen has proven that they can survive a winter in our environment. And so that's overwintered. You have to be careful how people sell you overwintered bees, because we don't have a really robust queen rearing operation in Connecticut that begins to produce queens until later on in the season. So, that when drones are flying right around, swarm season, there are some folks that produce them earlier, but for the most part, our queens come a little bit later in the season than our bees do. Our bees come at the end of March sometimes, early April, and you can't get bees that have an overwintered queen that time of year from a package or from a nuke, say, for instance. If somebody's going to make you a nuke that has an overwintered queen in it, then that will come later on in the year. And yeah, that's a good investment. That queen has proven that she can handle a colony during the year, and that she's capable of being a cold weather queen. Whether or not she'll survive in your apiary the next year and the same thing will happen is another, it's up for grabs. It depends on your bee management of that colony. But yeah, that is a good way. Now to find, we have two sources, I think, two breeders that are part of our Connecticut Queen Breeding Cooperative that are providing us with locally bred queens, Connecticut local queens. One of them I mentioned is Brian Martin, and his specialty is on sensitive hygienic queens. Maybe somebody can put up his, Jose, maybe you can put up his link in the chat. And then Mark Serzak is another one. He's also a breeder. He's more generalist, but he's an extraordinary queen breeder. So is Byron. And both of them are, of course, Mark is internationally known for his insemination skills, and he puts together special queens that are inseminated with certain kinds of sperm. And so that's really technical. But both of them have really good credentials as queen breeders, and they breed queens and sell them in Connecticut. And those are the two that I would recommend. They are you can buy them through the Connecticut Queen Breeders Cooperative. You can buy them directly from them. So those are two that I would say yes. And then, of course, again, once you get that queen, your job's not over. Your job just begins, because then it's up to your beekeeping skills to keep that colony alive and for it to winter. If you think you're buying something, I think a lot of beekeepers may get convinced that they're buying a queen that will overwinter for them automatically. That's not the case. So you have to manage your colony during the season, and you have to make sure that they have wonderful stores before they go into winter. You have to manage their varroa. You can buy the best queen in the world, and it'll die at the hands of poor management. So you have to make sure you understand that. But to wintering character, say, we've got this big controversy in the bee business, in the beekeeping world, talking about the difference between southern queens and northern queens. And it makes some sense to think that queens that are bred in colder climates have an easier job of overwintering in colder climates. And ones that survive in colder climates and are bred from after that have a better chance of surviving in the winter.
Bill, I got a hive, a swarm, and that's no guarantee that queen isn't 2 or 3 years old, right?
Well, you have a swarm. Where do you live, Kenneth?
In Torrington.
Oh yeah. So yeah, no, that's probably one of your neighbor's queens.
Yeah, it was from a couple towns over.
Yeah. So no, but that was she a laying queen?
Well, yeah, I suppose. I don't.
What do you mean? Hold on. What do you mean you suppose? Did you put her in a box?
Put her in a box. She survived. I don't know if they're going to make it through the winter. They're pretty weak going into the winter. Coming, late fall, they look pretty sick. But even at that, I'm just saying in general, if you buy somebody's swarm, there's no guarantee as, how do you know what its longevity is? You have to just
no idea.
More vigilant, right?
Right. You have no idea. If it's a prime swarm, that means that queen overwintered in that colony and she swarmed with that colony. That would be the mated queen. So, you know what a prime swarm is. People may not know what a prime swarm is. I'll just go over it again. A prime swarm is when a colony overwinters, comes into spring really strong, and the first indication it gets is to reproduce, or when it does reproduce, it swarms with the queen that it overwintered with. That colony that queen is at least a year old. She's been, laying wonderfully. It's a healthy colony because they overwintered, and then she goes with that colony, that swarm, and then if you catch that swarm, you have a prime swarm. That is, you have a 1-year-old queen, at least 1 year. And she may have overwintered she may be 2 years old, and you get her in her 3rd year, right? So yeah, and usually those queens are fine, but if I do that, I will requeen that colony at the end of the season because I know she's at the end of her life.
Yeah, if I see them in the spring, that's the first thing I'm gonna do is go look for a queen. So.
Well, you'll know if there's a queen in the spring. You'll just look for eggs, in the spring. All right, what else we got? Now, there was another question about, what was that second part of that question, Jose? Oh, no, that's it. We covered it, right?
Yeah, we covered that.
Okay.
There's one other question. My 2 hives died somewhere in the last 3 weeks. I have 2 deeps per hive. I close the openings. Is there a risk of wax moth or hive beetle entering the hives in March or early April before I can get a package of bees?
No, there's no risk of small hive beetles or wax moths in March. It's too early in the season for that. Now, if you left it there for a period of time, then it would be vulnerable. But wax moths don't start to fly around and go in colonies until later on. And so I would stand that colony up on its end and just let it sit like that for a while. If you're not going to get in there and take care of it right away. what I suggest is any dead out, you get in there and remove all the dead bees out of it now, if you can. And well, not now, because you might interpret something as a dead out at this point. And it's actually a live colony of bees. So be careful this time of year, you know, because it's really, really cold right now. Don't go in your colonies at all right now, by the way.
No, it's too cold.
Too cold.
So we have a couple of other questions. Someone wants to know when's the best time to purchase a new queen to replace an older, poor laying queen.
Well, immediately.
Yeah.
So as soon as you have a queen of you know, any kind of questionable behavior, whether or not it's she's not laying well, spotty, she got spotty you know, spotty brood pattern, or she's whatever. It's the temperament of the colony is really hot. You know, that's when you replace them. And right then is that's what you do. You replace them at that point.
Someone would like to put supers on as soon as possible in spring to give their colonies with high population room in order to avoid swarming. And so should they leave off their queen excluders, and will they swarm anyway?
Leave off their queen excluders? You mean put them between the supers and the main and the brood boxes? Is that what they mean?
Presumably.
Come forward, whoever wrote that.
Joseph.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Hey, Joseph.
Between the brood boxes and the supers, just not put any queen excluders on at all.
Well, do you have drawn comb for your supers?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So yeah, so you can put them on without supers. You might get some brood in that box, you know. So in one of your supers, you might get some brood up there. The queen might go away. If that doesn't bother you, you can do it that way. And you put a lot of them on. Actually, the more you put on, the better. If you put on 2 or 3, you know, early in sometime in April, you're fine. You know?
I just figured that, you know, the more room that they have for brood would lessen the urge to swarm. I don't know.
No,
No.
that's not exactly how it works. But you will avoid having the brood net, the brood area backfilled with nectar. So if a colony doesn't have room to store nectar in the brood boxes that it has, then it'll backfill in the cells in the brood area with nectar. That'll normally get a swarm started. So if you put a lot of supers on, or some supers, a couple, early in the season, before all of that happens, and by the way, at a time when the bees can easily move up into them. In other words, there's no shoulder of honey over the top of that brood nest. You know what I mean? You guys know what I mean? Let me show you a picture of this. See if I can find it. While I'm looking for this. We talk about this a lot, this honey frame. No, I'm not seeing that. Now I know I have a lot of pictures of this, I just can't find. So bees will build. Well, let me put it this way. You want to make sure that you have room for the bees to walk over dry comb before they get up to your supers. You don't want them on honey, because the honey defines the top of the colony for bees. So if there's honey, capped honey, if you do it later on in the season, your bees won't cross that. They'll just think that it's that's the end of the colony. That's the height, and they won't go over it. They're not likely to go over it. They're much more likely to go over it if there's a free way for them to walk up. And yeah, so it's unnatural for that to happen. So for you to for a bee colony to find out all of a sudden that it has drawn comb over its head is totally unnatural, right? If in a tree, the comb would be fixed and then the flow would start. If it's a really strong flow, they might build a little bit more comb, but likely in a tree, they've already built out all their comb. So they'll start to backfill the brood nest. And when they do that, they'll swarm out of that tree. You know, colonies in trees swarm a whole lot. So that's what they would do. You know, for us as beekeepers, we put supers on top of them. We give them an opportunity to store that nectar up above the brood nest, which they couldn't do naturally. They take advantage of that sometimes, and then they won't swarm as much. They will swarm though. Still, you know, Joe, you can't stop it completely, even if you put a lot of supers over the top.
Okay, thank you. This past season was a banner year for swarming. There, I had three or four swarms in my yard this year.
Did you make honey though? Still?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. You can still do it.
I don't know what's going to happen this year. No.
No one does.
How is your Varroa count with all those swarms?
I had a Hive Varroa count in both my hives that I have eventually lost throughout, and I treated what I could when it was when I could with formic when the temperature was allowed, and they were still going good in the fall when I did an oxalic vapor treatment on them. They were still going fine, and then in late December there was a day when one hive was doing really good, and I didn't see any activity in the other hives, and sure enough, it was dead out. It was gone. And there were a lot of dead bees there, so they didn't abscond. They died, and it was probably because of the Varroa.
Yeah, most likely. Most likely they vectored a lot of viruses in them, and the viral count, you can kill as many Varroa as you want. You're not gonna affect the viruses, because you can't kill the viruses inside bees. If they get a lot of vector, if they've got a big viral load going into the first time they hit a cold spell, they die.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, because they produced a lot of honey this season.
Yeah, we can hear you, Lynn.
Oh yeah, sorry. Talking about the swarms, I mean, I'm new at this. I have a horizontal hive, only one. If the bees are crowded in the spring when we get there, is it advantageous to split that hive from the get-go? Because I can't put supers on top of supers with this system. I'll either have to split them, or they're going to swarm probably, if they're going to do it.
If they're going to do it, they're going to swarm, or you can split the colony. You just have to have another horizontal hive.
Yeah. Okay.
Put them in this is your. But I got to hand it to you, Lynn. You stopped talking about the guy that sold you these bees. I'm glad this is the first time he's talking about him and his hive and how he's telling you how to manage them. But,
yeah, I know. I'm reaching out to other people. I'm finally getting other information, but it's, like I said, I don't even know if these guys are alive in this thing. I tried listening. I haven't heard anything. And actually, somebody on this Zoom at one time said they used a plastic tube, like a tube that you would use like in an aquarium, and you could pass it through the mouse guard, and you can really listen. It personifies sound. But I didn't hear anything in there.
You tried that?
Yeah.
So you've never had.
I gave the colonoscopy, the thing a colonoscopy, literally.
You did.
I didn't hear anything.
Well, so I take it that you are really a new beekeeper, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because you've never gotten stung on the inside of your ear. Now,
no.
Because the last time that happened to me, I actually had to sit down and breathe for like 5 minutes, deep breaths, before I thought I was going to pass out. So I do not suggest you use a tube that's any wider than a bee can crawl through.
Oh, no. This is small. It's a very small plastic tube.
All right.
But like I said, I haven't heard anything, and I'm anticipating that maybe they're not alive. I mean, mid-November, they were like on fire, and I figure, well, maybe they're just real quiet. But like I said, I'm just thinking in the spring, if you can't go vertical with this thing. So for the swarm situations, it's just better just to get another one and maybe just split the hive from the get-go and go from there.
Well,
if they are alive.
Yeah, you're gonna need. You can't split it early in the season. You're gonna have to split it when drones are flying, unless you want to buy a new queen. And then I don't know about how your hive is made up, but you can split it inside the horizontal hive. You can do that.
Oh.
You can make a split right inside that colony if you have another entrance.
Hmm.
You only have one entrance?
No, I got two. I got one on the top on this thing, and it's one on the bottom, the bottom board. But they have two entrances. Actually, they can come in and actually go into the frames from the top if they wanted to, and in good times. And then there's one on the bottom, on the base, like a standard hive. So, like I said, I'm so new at this. Like I said, I'm thinking about if I have to restart in the spring, am I going to get a nuke? Because I don't want to start again with a package of bees and have to start from ground zero again on this thing.
Oh, you don't want to have to do that?
Well, I've been reading about the nukes, and it seems like it's a sort of a jumpstart system. If you have to, that's the way I'm reading it. I may be wrong, but
yeah.
So
between nukes and packages, there's advantages and disadvantages to both ways.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Read a little bit about it and then make your decision.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Bill, we have a couple of comments about reversing boxes in the spring. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, you can do it if you want. You can reverse boxes. I would just remind you that no natural colony ever reverses its tree. So think about how hard that might be to do for a colony inside of a tree. So the theory behind this sort of modern trend of reversing boxes is that bees want to build up. So what beekeepers have found over decades of keeping bees is that they find that in the wintertime, in the springtime, when they first do their inspections, all of their bees are in the top box, and that's the way it should be. They've eaten up all the way through their honey stores, and they end up in the top. Right. So then the theory was, well, let's just reverse them, and then let the bees then work their way up again. Well, you can do that. You have to get that exactly at the right time. You can't do that when bees have already built up a lot of brood. So, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. I'm going to start talking about the study I want to present to you guys tonight. But you can only do that when all the brood is in one area. If by the time you get around to reversing your boxes, the bees in the springtime have built between combs in the bottom box and the top box, if you reverse that, you destroy the order of their brood nest completely. And if you do that, you can cause more problems than you're going to solve by reversing them. So if you decide to reverse, you have to reverse very early when there's no brood in the bottom box at all. If by the time you get around to trying to reverse, and it happens quickly, by the way, and sometimes it happens really early in March, that there's brood in the top and bottom. So you have to be very conscious of this, because the way that the bees have constructed that nest over winter and into the early spring is that they're building it so it's most efficient at the way that they handle it, how they feed brood. And it's been worked out over a million years, and they know exactly what they're doing. If you come along and reverse the boxes on them and put a little patch of brood above, and then you have a lot of brood below, you've destroyed their natural pattern, and you could end up killing the brood above it. You can just leave it alone, and it'll reverse itself. Bees will eventually build down. So I'm not big on reversing boxes. I only reverse them under certain circumstances, and it's only when I say reverse. The only time I do it is if I have a lot of honey left over, and I have frames of honey that I want to feed to bees, and I've come into spring, and I noticed that the bottom box is empty, and all my bees are in the top box. I'll put that box down on the bottom board, and then I'll put a box of honey on top of them. That's not exactly reversing. That's just feeding out my extra honey. So that's the only time I change the order of the brood nest. So I'm sort of a natural beekeeper in that way. Even though I'm using unnatural bee containers, I'm using boxes like you are. I still let bees do exactly what they want inside there, unless of course they're diseased or they need my help. I let them build their brood nest the way that they want to build it. I don't interfere much with it unless I want to pull bees out of there to keep them from swarming. I'll take some bees, some brood out and put them into weaker colonies and so on and so forth in the spring. But for the most part, I just let them go along and observe what they're doing. You know, that's the most of the fun, and it makes some honey.
Just to interject here for a moment, typically what we do with these bee talks is we have just an open forum for the first hour or so, and oftentimes Bill will reserve the last half hour for a topic of his choice that he thinks is important. I did not have an opportunity to talk to Bill today, whether he had something like that planned for today. So I'm interrupting here just to give you a sense of the time, number one, and there are other questions that are still in the chat. One that we probably want to address at some other point, maybe a separate.
Oh, go ahead. What is it? Let's do it now, because I only have 15 minutes on this other thing.
A question about flow hives, of course.
Sylvia's here. Where's Sylvia? She's here.
Yeah, that's right. But no, it's not Sylvia. It's Joseph. There he is. So we can talk about that. There's a question about drone brood and whether we should remove frames if we have a lot of drone brood in those frames, and whether that would help to lessen the varroa mite load in a colony.
With what? With flow hives?
No, the two separate questions.
All right. So the drone brood trapping is what you're talking about. Then, right, Joseph? Is that what you're talking about?
No, Joseph is talking about the flow hive. Bill is asking how much drone brood would we need in a hive and whether we should remove some of those frames if we have a lot of drone brood and whether that would help lessen the varroa mite load in the colony.
Can I add to this?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Okay. I had spoken to you the last session about my bees absconding, and it was probably because of varroa mite, because you had said I didn't do anything wrong. So I'm thinking that maybe because I saw a lot of brood during the late summer of the drone brood, and should I just eliminate a percentage of it to help with the varroa mite problem? Because the varroa mites, from what I understand, tend to draw toward the drone brood.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what statistic you want to believe, but mites are attracted about 8 times greater to drone brood than they are to normal. But I'm kind of concerned that you said you saw a lot of drone brood at the end of the summer.
Yeah, can you see my hands? You know, hang on one second.
Your camera's off.
So. Yeah, camera's off.
We're gonna fix that right now, and here we go. So, you know, good size like this on, you know, a frame, and there was kind of spotty on some of the others. There was probably maybe 1 or 2 others that had a small amount, about this much. So I'm thinking in entirety, there's probably about this much of drone brood. And is that too much?
Well, so there's something, so to answer your question, of course, it's impossible to answer it at this point with, you know, even though, you know, I get what you're saying with that demonstration. The question I would ask, of course, right away is, what is your colony doing in late summer with a whole lot of drone? Because that's not a time when we normally have a lot of drone. But what are you talking about? What time of year are you actually talking about, Bill?
I'm talking about late August, September, and October.
Yeah, no. You may have had a drone laying colony, a drone laying
like a failing queen.
Or failing queen. You know, so that's what I was thinking.
Okay.
You know, that time of year you wouldn't have. That's the time of year when bees do not treat the female bees in the colony, the workers, do not treat male bees really well at that time. That's when they're pulling them out by their wings and letting them die in front of the colony. Drones are expelled from the colony during that time of year. And the colony doesn't usually build drone populations that late. The only time you ever see drone in a colony that late is if there's something wrong with the queen, or mostly with the queen, or the colony's queenless, and you're getting laying workers and they're laying little. Were the drones really small?
Should we exclude them? Should we get rid of that frame and then just
No,
put
I'm
another
talking
frame?
about that there might be something wrong with the queen in that colony. You can do
Okay,
whatever you
well, the queen was
yeah.
brand new.
Well, yeah, they don't come with warranties or anything. I mean, it's like,
No, I know that.
you know, so it's like she could have been bad out of the box, you know, like.
Bill, maybe you should address the issue of removing drones earlier as a mite control.
Well, you can do that. Yeah, that's a different thing. And I was going to suggest that you come to the May 15th Lockwood Farm presentation, and then you'll get drone frames there, which are designed for the bees to build drone comb off of, and then trap varroa in those frames. So yeah, Bill, so that is a good technique to trap varroa in your colony. It's not effective alone as drone, it's part of a integrated pest management system, and it will serve to reduce the drone population in your colonies by about 10%. It's totally ineffective if you're trying to use that alone as a strategy, but it can be valuable as part of an integrated pest management practice that includes drone trapping, testing for drone, some kind of treatment, screen bottom boards, other things that are part of this whole IPM system of management, pest management.
I've heard of people where they'll take the drone frames, and once the drone brood is laid on them, they'll feed it to like their chickens, or they know someone who has chickens, they'll feed it to them to help control the population.
Of chickens?
Of the drones. They'll feed the drone brood to the chickens to help control the varroa.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you don't have to even do that. You can just put it in the freezer. So if you put it in the freezer for like 72 hours or something, and then you put it back in the colony, all of those drone pupae and they're dead, and then actually, it doesn't actually kill. Sometimes it doesn't kill all of the varroa. I've done that, and then uncap the frames, and I've seen varroa crawl out of them. So, but it does kill all the other stages of varroa in there, and it will normally kill most of the varroa. Then you can put it back in the colony, and the bees will clean it out. If you don't have chickens, if you have chickens, you can give it to them, but I wouldn't waste a whole frame of comb, because I don't think chickens would be really delicate about taking. I always wondered about that with what they do to the frame. I mean, they must really.
You'll be surprised.
What do they do?
Another question?
Martha, what do they do with it?
They can clean it up. They're very precise with picking. I had quails, so they were very precise, but chickens, I know they're good too.
They're chickens, they take it, yeah. So
chickens made a mess.
All right, so yeah, drone trapping, read about that. Drone trapping is a strategy that you can use to help control varroa in your colonies. You'll be able to get the kind of frames you need to do that if you come to Lockwood Farm.
Okay, can I ask another question?
Sure.
So if I have excessive drone, can I just get rid of that? Let's say there's too much drone.
Okay, so here's the concept.
So Bill, before you answer that question, okay, it's an opportunity to address a second question that's been asked, which I think is interesting. There seems to be a little bit of a disconnect, since we know about the importance of keeping drones in a colony. So if on the one hand, we're talking about the importance of keeping drones in a colony, and now we're talking about getting rid of the drones, could you address that as you answer this question?
Yeah, I was about to actually. I mean, so the interesting part is I was having the same thought. So there's no such thing as excessive drone in a colony. The colony will build the amount of drone that it is genetically predisposed to build. And that's usually around 15 or 20% of the colony's population. Mm-hmm. So in a regular colony that's working right, in the early spring, especially right around swarm season, there will be a significant amount of drone in there. And if you haven't provided them with space to actually lay or draw out drone cells, if you've given them all structured foundation that's only worker cell size, then what will happen is those the bees will build comb, drone-sized comb, between frames, all in all spaces they can find inside the box. they'll build drone comb out so that they can get the right population. If you're a top eye hive keeper, or if you're doing that horizontal hive that Len is doing, then you would see that bees, the first thing they do in all situations where they're allowed to build natural comb, they proceed to build a whole frame of brood, either right after they start laying some workers, they'll turn around, draw out a whole frame of drone, and then populate that whole frame with drone bees. So we go out of our way to restrict bees from laying drone, but it's never, in my opinion, healthy for that. There's a balance that bees need between worker and drone in the colony, and we try to destroy that. So I wouldn't bother with trying to knock down inside of a colony unless I was unless I was convinced and knew exactly what I was doing, and I had a reason to do that. But I don't usually do that. Some people.
Thank you.
And they'll pull out a drone to look and see whether or not they have Varroa in there. But you don't even have to do that, because I'll guarantee you have Varroa in there. All right. So yeah. So just to summarize, bees will build, the right amount of drone for their hive.
So would it be an accurate count if someone were to, if we were to take the drone and like a frame, let's say there was a good amount of drone, take that and do a Varroa amount count on it, and calculate and use that as the sacrificial element as to Varroa count, rather than using the bees. If we were to take the drone,
well, the drones won't be hanging around on that frame, right? So they're not going to be there. And you got to roll bees in a completely different way. You have to wash bees from nurse frames. So you have to wash to find out the count. You have to do it from nurse. Bill, you want to kill those drones, man. I can see that.
Yes,
I know you. I know you.
Last time.
You're a drone killer, man. I can see that in you.
Disruptor might.
So learn how to trap drones the correct way, and then you can have your way with them, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, get the bees to draw out drone comb, and then get the queen to lay in those cells. Wait till they're capped, about 9 days or so, and then if you were able to get your queen to just lay after the comb was drawn, if you can get your queen to just lay in that frame, in other words, to restrict her somehow, there's little cages you can buy that you can restrict her, just that one single comb. She'll lay that out with eggs in 1 day. Then you can take her out of there, and then the nurse bees will come in and feed the larva, and you'll cap it in about 9 days. And then some point right before all of that drone is capped, the Varroa will go over there and invade those cells, and then you pull it. That's how you do it the right way. But if it's natural comb, no reason to do it.
Thank you.
All right.
John, do you have a question? I see your hand is up. John's iPad is muted and you have your hand up. If you have a question, feel free to ask. Your hand is up.
He didn't put his hand up. That's what he's saying. I didn't do that.
Hey, Bill, I have a quick question.
Go ahead, Peter.
You talked about, adding honey supers, and I know you use queen excluders. I initially had a problem where I put on queen excluders. However, I just had foundation in my honey supers, and the bees didn't seem to come over there. I did read, however, that if it's drawn comb, they will come through the honey supers.
Yes.
Is that your experience?
Oh yeah. If it's drawn comb is like a real different experience for bees. Foundation, have to know how comb drawn with when you just have foundation in this. I think I've mentioned this a few times, but there are times will indicate to you when they're ready to draw comb. and they build what is referred to as frost wax around the edges of comb on the top bar, and you'll see it's a crystal clear, no, it's not clear, but it's a beautiful white wax. It doesn't have any color at all. That's exactly the way that wax comes out of bees when they make the little wax scales. It's pure white. Well, as soon as you start to see that on the shoulders or the top of your frames or on the top bar, that's when you put your supers on with foundation, and then the bees will come up and draw comb. You draw that wax out and then store honey in it. You cannot get bees to deal with drawing wax out unless you get them at the right point when they can do that. Right temperature and right conditions, and then they'll draw all the wax you want from them. The best way to get it drawn out is with a swarm. A swarm is ready to build wax. It'll build wax for you like crazy. And that's what you should, that's what you can do. But you can also force bees into drawing wax, like with a package. We always do that all the time with a package and foundation, right? We put a package of bees in, they don't have, and they have to survive. So then we feed them and they use that carbohydrate to make wax. And then the queen starts laying, and then they build frame after frame after frame after frame. And then that's how we get them to do it initially. But your question is, well, then how do you get supers drawn? Because there's really no, and that's what I'm saying. You have to get that right indication. So Peter, when we get to that point later on in the season, right, I'm going to announce that my bees are doing it now. And right, and then we'll be able to all look together and see, hey, am I seeing signs of that? It happens at a certain time of year, usually with a major flow. And then we should all learn that, because it's a very valuable skill. And that's how you get, now I don't care, because I have tons of supers already drawn and I use them year after year because I use excluders on them. But I remember this, I remember trying the anxiety around how am I ever going to get these honey supers drawn? They didn't even touch them last year, so on and so forth. So yeah, it took me a couple of years in the beginning to get my supers drawn, and then we'll just keep them.
And just in relation to that, Sylvia is asking a question about queen excluders and when to put them on in order to avoid brooding the honey supers. And I know that there are some folks who would just put them in right away, and other folks who advocate waiting a week or even two to let the bees really get used to going up there. And the queen will actually lay up there for a little bit, but during that time before you put the queen excluder up there. So what's your thought about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, you can actually do that. You could try that, let the bees get up there and rummage around up in that super and see if they start to draw comb up there. And then you can put a queen excluder on. You can also just, make sure that you put the queen, if you're going to do that though, you have to make sure that the queen isn't in the super.
Yeah. So don't you is there a certain time of the year when you know this is going to start happening, and or is that going to be, hopefully that's going to be in the monthly talks that we would anticipate it eventually when that timing would be?
Yeah, it's so we'll talk about that. Like, hey, look, guys, here's what's happening now. What I saw today is X. Like it looks like my bees are ready. They're drawing frost wax up. And what I've discovered is that it's not much different for anybody. So if it's happening in my yard, it's probably happening in your yard. It will be shortly, or it's already happening.
Yeah,
so
I have a year to go, so I'm not as worried, but I just needed conceptually to understand that.
Well, I think you got the right concept. So yeah.
I have a question. It's Marta. I have a question on winter patties, the low protein winter patties. I experimented this year. This is my 5th winter, and because I thought I didn't have enough sources of food because of the dearth. I put sugar cakes, and I had dry sugar also on the newspaper. And I noticed one of the colonies, actually my best colony, my Russian hybrid, they were very populous and active. And I took a peek maybe 2 weeks ago when it was warmer. It was like 45 degrees or around 40s. And they were eating pretty much all the sugar, everything was eaten. So I added the winter patties. I never used it before. And I've noticed after a week, there was a lot of dysentery sites on the entrance. It just looked very dirty. And that was on that specific hive. On the other hives, I didn't see any signs of them going into a crazy cleansing. Any words you can say? Because I'm just nervous. I never used that before. I know.
Yeah, so back up a little bit. So the colony that you fed got dysentery.
Yes.
All right, so that's I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's exactly what, if you put, even though there was only a little bit of protein in it, you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how much, we don't know. But it's not something you didn't make them. It's a product you bought, right?
Better be, yes. They were supposed to be very low in protein. I pay attention
Yeah,
to
it's
it.
95. Better be is 95.5. So it should be like 9% carbohydrate, 5% protein.
Yep.
But still, it's particulate. So you've loaded their hind gut with more particles, and they had to evacuate.
Yeah. So that's normal, kind of. I mean, it was.
Yeah, that's not dysentery. Dysentery is not. We've tried to associate that with brood maladies in the past, like nosema, and things. But really, I don't think that's ever been true. There's really no scientific correlation between what we see as dysentery and other diseases. And it's a sign of stress usually that bees have not had a chance to get out and cleanse. But this winter, for some reason, bees are flying at real low temperatures. I mean, I think seeing their bees fly at 40 degrees, so there's been a lot of interesting weather phenomena where bees are sensing warm temperatures and flying out into real cold weather. And I think it's kind of interesting. I don't think I've seen this much of that last years.
I would agree. I keep my eye every day, and I've seen them even actually below 40s. And I tried to rescue them because they flew outside, fell in the snow, and they were literally dying because, well, they were cold. They couldn't fly anymore. Yeah. But
what did you do?
I'm sorry?
What'd you do to them? You picked them up?
Well, I tried to put them back in the entrance, but they died in my hand, so couldn't do much. Even one bee.
Okay, so wait a minute, you didn't do it right.
Yeah.
So you pick up a bunch of them, like about 10 or 15, right? Put them all in your hand. Cup your hands like this, right?
And warm it up.
No. Then you fold your hands like this, and then you blow into them with your mouth. Now listen. All right, hold on. There's skeptics. I can see there's skeptics in this crowd. All right, so you do this like that for a long time. Not a long time, minute or so. Then you open up your hand. You'll see the first sign is they start to shake. They quiver, right? And then if you keep doing it, and if before you know it, they'll start to walk around. Now, here's the only trick to this: do not breathe in when you're doing it. Just breathe out, and then you don't breathe in when you're doing this. That's all. And then you just take them. They will totally revive. They're only in a chill coma.
Yeah.
They can last in a chill coma for almost 36 hours. You don't have, you can actually get them to revive. I do it all the time, and I don't know why I do it. I mean, clearly it doesn't save the colony or anything like that, but it's just so much fun to do. And then you can go back in the house and think, hey, Chris, I just saved 20 bees by a little bit of.
You made me feel better because I thought I was the crazy one, and I felt, sad that I wasn't successful, but I will use your method next time.
I'm going to tell you. Well, you see, sometimes you have to blow on them for a long time. And what happens is they'll twitch. The first twitch you get indicates that bee's coming out of that. Just try it for the biology of it. Forget about whether or not you're going to save any bees. Just try it for the biology. It's amazing to see them come
Just don't hyperventilate.
Don't breathe in.
It could be a bee whisperer.
Yeah,
That's
no,
right.
you can do it. Yeah, you can do that. It'll work. All right, we're gonna go. What do we got? 4 minutes. Well, 2 minutes. All right. So, what I'm gonna do instead of going over all this, I just wanted to let you know that your bees in this particular time of year are brooding up. All right. So, I have a study in front of me that I've been reading And I've known of other studies. One was done by Al Avatavila, the co-author of the Beekeepers Handbook, lives right here in Connecticut. He has 90th birthday this year. He's an extraordinary beekeeper, and he's also my mentor. I started keeping bees with him a very long time ago, and I learned a tremendous amount from him. And he did a study up in Cornell in the 70s. And this particular study that I'm looking at now was done between 1974 and 1975 in Scotland, in Aberdeen. And that's on the shore of Scotland near the North Sea. And this particular person that did this name is Mobus, M-O-B-U-S. So I suggest you look him up. And he outlines how much brood, how many eggs, and how many open brood and larvae, open brood and pupa and eggs he found on frames in 21 colonies that he inspected in November, December, January, and February of 1974 and 1975. So now you would think those are the coldest months of the year, and we're in February right now. I mean, yeah, we're in February, excuse me. And in February had a tremendous amount of brood. So there were frame after frame of brood, eggs, larvae, and sealed pupa. So in your colonies right now, if they're functioning correctly, that's going on and you don't even know about it, right? So bees are brooding up. And there's also, in this study, you could see if you look at it, that there's false starts. Bees will start and then stop raising brood and then start again. And so that's what happens in the end of, I think in beekeeping terms, we consider this sort of the beginning of the end of winter because of the brood that we have in our colonies at this point. If you were to go out there now, one of your strong colonies, and pull it, you'd see the same thing. You'd see brood there. But the point I want to make is that from now on, from the end of February to March, your bees are going to be using more of their food stores because they have to keep the brood nest warmer because they have a larger population of brood. And so this is the time when we have to make certain that bees have enough to get from this point into spring. So lots of bees will die in March because they starve. So the first chance we get now as beekeepers, and if you have bees that have survived this long, first chance you get when the colonies are flying, not in the 40-degree range, but when they're flying in 50 degrees. Say, for instance, you have a 50-degree day outside. Now the ambient temperature is 50 degrees. Get in there and take a look and see, if you got enough stores on that colony to get it through. If you don't, then you put a sugar cake in it or some winter patty or something like that to get it through. All right. So that's just the whole point of my talk about this particular study was to make certain that you understand that your bees have ramped up now, and at this point they're consuming more than you might think because they have to keep that brood box really warm. At this point, they're in the 95-degree range, and they won't stop that range they won't stop again until next year. All right, so they're going to stay at that temperature. And before this, they were riding along right nice. They could keep the brood nest at 78 degrees, didn't matter much to them. They didn't have a lot of brood, now they do. So they're using more stores. All right, so that's the abbreviated version of it. So listen, this has been a great session, at least I think so. And I really appreciate you guys showing up every month for this. We have a bunch of workshops listed on the website. Go take a look at them, start registering for those. They're all Zoom links. You're going to get package bee installation workshops and then spring inspection workshops and so on and so forth. And, so that's about it for me. Jose.